Okay, welcome to the 78th episode of an Evolving Man podcast. Today, I'm excited to be speaking to Marcus Gottlieb. Marcus is an experienced psychotherapist of humanistic and integrative orientation. He is registered with the UK Council for Psychotherapy and accredited by the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. One half of his practice is supporting boarding school survivors. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, a pleasure. So I've come across your work quite a bit, Marcus, in some of Nick's books, the trauma abandonment and privilege, and also looking at some of your papers. I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you got into the work you're now doing.
Well, I came into therapy in my 30s. I'm in my 60s now, so 30 years ago nearly. I think I was experiencing what I would now think of as depersonalization, really. Kind of, there was a feeling that things weren't real. I wasn't in my body. It's quite hard to describe, but I think at the time I would just have said that I was damaged or broken or something like that. Although I don't like to use that language now. I prefer language of wounded, I think, because wounds heal. And I wasn't aware of boarding school. I spent 5 years at boarding school. I wasn't, a bit more, I think. I wasn't aware of it as having been a problem at all, but my therapist kept mentioning it and what a strange thing it had been for my family to send me away, perhaps from my particular background and to the particular school. Anyway, so how did I get into the work? Well, then I discovered that there were some psychotherapists who were beginning to run workshops about the impact of boarding school. And I was very fortunate to be able to go on some of these and begin to connect to my true feelings about the experience. And then in due course, I went on the Nick Duffell's been running for many years a very big 4-day program for men who've survived boarding school, and I attended that. Then he ran a training course, and one thing's led to another. So,
Thank you for sharing. So coming back to the basics, what, in your opinion, your clinical experience, is boarding school syndrome?
Well, it's a kind of post-traumatic shock, really. For most people, never generalize and say for everybody, but for most people, boarding school is experienced as a shock. I mean, there are different kinds of shock. There's or trauma, really. That's a better word. There's shock trauma and there's strain trauma. Shock trauma is the immediate shock of being landed in a strange, cold, unfriendly, and alien place, and parents disappearing and being left to fend for oneself. That's often shock trauma. And strain trauma is the trauma that happens over years and years while dealing with the necessity of survival in what is pretty much a tough circumstance. I mean, I think a client of mine very recently put it very well. He said, he said, it's fucked up to live all those years in a place where no one loves you. That says it all, really. I mean, a child needs to live and grow up in a place where somebody cares if they have a smile on their face in the morning, where there's tenderness, where there's allowance for weakness, allowance for softness. there isn't anything of that in a boarding school is a business. It's an institution. And even the more benign ones cannot love you. They cannot be parents. And of course, many parents are deficient. In fact, most parents are deficient, really, but and some are, appalling. But most parents can provide a context where a child feels supported enough, watched over enough, guided, and also in a lot of these schools, well, I would say most of them to some degree, there is some kind of abuse, sometimes the most egregious, violence and sexual abuse. But maybe more commonly than that, just the experience of senior boys or bullies bursting into your dorm in the middle of the night so that you have to sleep with one eye open. I mean, I've heard that from countless people who've been through my consulting room. And so this is the strain trauma, really. You have to, that goes on maybe for the first couple of years at boarding school or maybe longer. And it forms a character that's really centered around avoiding trouble. Cautious, guarded, strategic, calculating, maybe domineering, maybe just chronically fearful or emotionally flat. I mean, people have different ways of handling it, but it's such an appalling preparation for adult life. And the impact does vary on the individual. A lot matters about, there's a lot in what experiences you've had prior to boarding school, what kind of attachments you've had, but very often there's already some kind of developmental trauma or deficit. Trauma is too much coming in. Mm. Deficit is not enough coming in, or neglect. But either is a wound for a child. And I know it's true for me and for many that there's already a certain kind of negative script, life script, formed prior to being sent away. And then the experience is there, make that even more concrete and intractable issues arise then that have to be undone in later life if we're lucky enough to have the opportunity. Workaholism, compartmentalization, all these ways people have of dealing with the turmoil of feelings that a child is experiencing when they're without basic protection, without somebody who cares that they have a smile on their face, a genuine smile, not a fake one.
Thank you.
And it has repercussions through the family, through society, siblings are affected. For many years before being sent away, I was the one kept at home, but my brothers were sent off. That was a shock in itself. Had elements of trauma, small t trauma, but it was a big gap for me to not have my brothers around. And I hear that a lot from people.
Thank you. Yeah, I heard one client saying to me that he went at age 8 and he left his sister at home. And when he came back at Christmas time, the sister commented, years later that you never came back. The brother that I knew never came back. It was just a totally different person.
And parents quite often detect that they can't somehow address it or admit it, or it's really tragic.
Yeah.
And then literally, sometimes we come back and I've heard so often, pets died and no one told me, no one wanted to upset me, or the parents have moved house. Many of these families are, say, forces families or in corporations where the child is going back to a different home, but it's never home actually. The nearest thing that they can identify as a home is the school.
Yeah, I've been doing some fascinating research, Jennifer Freyd and betrayal trauma, that when we attach to the institution, then we have this thing called betrayal blindness. We can't see what the institution has done to us because they are our attachment figure.
Yeah.
Therefore, the abuse, those types of things, it's like, no, that wasn't, like, you can't see it because that's your survival mechanism.
And you may be all the more likely to replicate it in your own adult life.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I have to hear that. Workaholism, compartmentalization, these different things. So thank you. I mean, what was your boarding school experience like? If you're comfortable with sharing or not, I know you talk a little bit about it in the paper you published.
I don't remember if I described it like this there, but I have described it as being like being sent away to a penal colony on Mars.
Wow.
It was an awfully long way from home. And there seemed to be a lot of rules to trip me up. And I noticed a tinge of pride as I say this, which is fairly typical. I survived it, good for me, which is pretty insane, really. I don't think a child should have to go through that. I think most of the other kids I was around had been boarding since they were 8 or 9. I was 12. So I was coming into, I was a sort of family child coming into a group of relatively feral kids, so that wasn't easy. I was also an outsider because I was Jewish, so there's a kind of, that kind of goes along with insecurity anyway. And there's a really good book by Frederick Raphael, a memoir of his time at I think Charterhouse in the late 40s or 50s. And he has some phrase about, he talks about the numerus clausus, which was the quota, maximum number of Jews that was allowed by public schools to be admitted. And after the war, it was reimposed by quite a lot of schools. And he has, I can't remember the phrase he uses, but it's good. It's something like, they seem to have been fearing a tsunami of Hebrews coming in to overwhelm the school or something like that. Anyway, that was not many years before my time. And even in my time, there were teachers who, I remember a couple who reminisced a bit fondly about visits to Nazi Germany, for example. And so that was another layer, and that's, now I do some work with the Jewish community, which I think is part of the healing that I work with ultra-Orthodox, people who are leaving ultra-Orthodoxy, who struggle because they're like, they've kind of grown up in a cult, really, and it's very tough for them. So that's work I'm quite committed to now, quite apart from the boarding school stuff.
Thank you. It sounds like it was that's an incredible way to describe your experience, a penal colony on Mars with all these rules to trip you up. were there specific things which happened which were like, was it that first day, that shock, or was it a combination of that strain trauma?
The first week, I think, things, yeah. Well, we still had the fagging system, so one of the senior boys would yell in a booming voice, and wherever you were in the house, if you were a newbie, you'd have to sort of run, and the last to get there, quite often me, had to do some silly errand. I mean, we weren't being roasted over a spit or anything like that. It wasn't Tom Brown school days, but it was. It's, I mean, there were tests like, I think we had to learn the colours of about 100 different sports teams, and the senior boys were going to test us at the end of the week, and I found that a very, very alarming process. It was you can't go home to your pet dog or your mummy or just have your own bedroom back or anything. There's no, you just take a breath. You're like that all the time, 24/7, holding your breath. And that gets wired into the brain. Fight, flight, all the time. And then it's quite a challenge to come out into adult life and to be normal, really. I mean, maybe fortunately, there are lots of other people who've been through this experience all around you, and many people spend their entire lives just mixing with other survivors and don't see anything strange about it. But if you encounter people who are able to breathe and to experience the flow of their feelings, the flow of their experiences, and to actually rest and actually be connected to their insides. I mean, that's an alien encounter when you come back down from Mars. That's what I've found anyway, and a lot of people I work with.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. Yeah, that's right. Fear, and I've heard this so many. I'm fascinated at the moment. I'm buying a lot of biographies, autobiographies of well-known ex-boarders, and just to hear them speak, most people say, it's a very small percentage who are negatively impacted by boarding school. Yeah, I can't find any biographies, and I've got some quite well-known ones. I've got Richard Branson, I've got David Cameron, Bear Grylls. Bear Grylls says, suddenly when I hit boarding school, all I felt was fear. Fear makes you look tough on the outside, but makes you weak on the inside. You read these, Richard Branson, sexually abused. It's like these things, and he was beaten every week until he bled from 7 years old because he was dyslexic. And so I'm hearing fear. I mean, how does that impact us as an adult if we've grown up in that fight flight? How does, because some people say, oh, it was fine, it didn't impact me boarding school. How might that be showing up as a symptom, Marcus?
There was a writer the other week, Emma Beddington, in The Guardian. She wrote, like a cabinet minister sent to boarding school at 7, I find my emotions alarming, embarrassing, and mostly try to squash them. She said, 20 years after my mum died, I still don't know how to mark the day. And that was what my mother died a couple of months ago at a grand old age of nearly 96.
Wow.
And I don't know how to mark anything about it, really. I mean, I'm working on it. But someone who once came to see me who talked about coming to boarding school at 7 or 8 and being sedated
Sedate.
The matron had a bottle of some fluid or other labeled homesick medicine, and it was a sedative. And how does one begin to get one's head around that? So, a person, we survive. That's what fight and flight are about. They are the body's defenses. They're very, very effective. Nearly all of us survive. We don't drown. And then at some point later in life, probably, the life force starts calling out to us, and it may be the sound of pain, maybe a howl of pain, maybe maybe we have a sense of there being a lot of tears within, and increasingly people can find their way to therapy, and if they're lucky, a good loving relationship helps as well. And then they have a context in which they can recover their true self, come back to who they were meant to be. So I do think there is such a thing as a true self. This is a person who I was born to be. If I hadn't been knocked off the path that was intended, if I had been able to grow in a nutritious soil. But boarding schools aren't nutritious soils for anyone. I mean, very occasionally I can see that they're better than a very abusive home environment. I think that does happen. Very exceptional. Usually we're sent away for, I don't know what was true for you, but it's got something to do with socioeconomic status, something about, having the right connections, maybe the right accent even, having a good education. That's the rationale for it, but it's more than that, isn't it? Because of course a good education is available in lots of schools that aren't boarding. I don't know how you found it. Was it a good education where you went?
Oh my God, yeah, my boarding school. So I was reflecting on that all of my family went to boarding school. My mother didn't actually, but all of my uncles, aunts, grandparents, my father. And my father was invalided out of the Navy. So all of my friends in the local area, they were all naval children. They got sent at 7 or 8. So suddenly they would disappear. And because my father was no longer in the Navy, he couldn't afford to send me to school. So I went age 11. And I was told, because my father had been very poorly, he was an alcoholic, recovering alcoholic, that if he died, I would be taken care of. I would get a good education. And I think for me, that was the reason I was sent. And I think I would have been sent earlier if he was still in the Navy, because in those days, you would get a bursary to send your child to boarding school. Whereas if you were in the Navy, because my father had left, I didn't get that. So, and I think, but I chose it. I chose age 10 to decide to go to boarding school. And I think that's quite a difficult weight for someone who's 10 or 11. I got interviewed by Philip Davis, the MP, on GB News about a month ago. And he said, I chose to go to boarding school. And he said the first year was horrific. He was homesick for the whole year. He said, then I got used to it, and for me, it's a heavy weight, a heavy burden for a young child to carry, that, my God, I'm in this horrible place. without everything, and I've chosen it.
Mm.
But the truth is, we didn't really choose it because of the Enid Blytons and because of the boys' own magazines, because all of our parents go, "I'll be great for you." Well, and the marketing prospectuses are amazing for these schools. The facilities. It's not the case that you choose it; you've been sold it.
Yeah,
Very different.
yeah. No, a child is not capable of choice. That's basic. Just as they're not capable of choosing to have sex with an adult. I mean, it's no more. There's an age of consent, and below a certain age, it's not consent, and it's not choice.
Mm-hmm.
It's nonsense.
Yeah. So I'd love for us to segue a bit into the impact of sexuality in a boarding school setting, because I found reading your paper, and I'll put it into the description so people can read through it. I just found I could just resonate so much in it. So I'd love you to talk a little bit about that.
It's people come at it with different needs and emerging with different sorts of difficulties. But let's say for someone who is gay, basically parents want us to be straight. So that's already a problem. Because parents need to accept us and consider us enough as we are, whoever we are, whatever we are. Not criticize, overly over control, overly limit, but respond to who we are as an emerging person, appreciate us, respect us, and guide us wisely. And sexuality begins to come alive at an early age, really, 4 or 5. I can look back and see signs of that. In some way, a boy that doesn't conform to conventions of masculinity, a girl that doesn't conform to conventional ideas of femininity, for example, a boy who's a bit flamboyant or whatever. And then they're sent off to boarding school, whatever age it is, whether it's post, during, or prior to puberty. And yeah, they're living in this penal colony or a police state. It's also been described to me by a client as like being in 1984. You're being monitored because being gay is the worst thing. It's the worst thing. And you pick that up. You may have picked that up before you went to boarding school, but it's very much more reinforced when you're there, And so that many kids don't even dare think about being gay, even when they know they are at some level. But pray that whatever's going on is a phase. And that's what we call the closet, really. And that can lead to a habit of thinking, or feeling, really. I wish my reality were different from whatever it is, which is chronic. It's very familiar to me. Always, wishing my reality were not what it actually is. So there's no ability to breathe, no sort of equanimity, no. One of my teachers talked about a thusness. Things are just thus. So important to be able to grow up with parents who can inculcate that into us. Acceptance of what we cannot change. Anyway, back to sexuality. Commonly, a terror of being caught out, being exposed, which I think breeds a caution or even paranoia into a person. people camouflage. I remember practicing a very strong handshake as a teenager at boarding school.
Mm.
That was part of my camouflage. I mean, it was absurd. It was just sort of military. It wasn't me at all. And a shut-offness, because touch, well, there is no safe touch at boarding school, really. But that's, you know, to the power of squared or something, when you actually want touch,
mm-hmm.
and it's forbidden, you know. So you shut off. So you become emotionally flat, or you become domineering, or you distract, or you become addicted to something or other. Again, it's a whole other layer of fear on top of what most boarding school children have anyway.
Thank you, Marcus.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And as you speak, it's like, oh, I can resonate with so much of that for myself. I mean, for me, in the school, it was like to be gay was the ultimate insult. If you did something wrong, or you did something a bit, you touched someone or you hugged someone, it's like, you gay, don't touch me. It's like this real homophobia that you mentioned in your paper. And yet it was interesting that, I talked to this with one of my the guys I was at school with, who was on my year, who says it was really strange. To be gay was, evil, but yet we knew that half of our teachers were gay. And it was like, and there was, so that was very strange. And then that thing of touch, I just wanted to be held. And I remember spending time with another boy, and we got caught, or he told someone else. And then I was like, oh my God, I have to really suppress that part of me. That cannot happen again, because if that gets out, that's the end of my boarding school life. So at that point, it was like, boom, no.
And it could have been the end, because the punishments are, of either being expelled or just being ostracized are very, very real.
Yeah. It's like this half life that we have to live. And it's like, yeah. So I think I see that, coming back to Bear Grylls thing, that's all I felt, even though on the surface, after a while, I got into being good at sport or reasonable academically. All I felt was fear. And I had this hatred of myself because I thought I was gay. Really, what I know now, I just needed touch. I just needed warmth of someone. I had none. I just wanted a hug with someone. And we did have girls there, but the first few years, we hardly saw them unless in class, in this really regimented environment. We weren't. So, so I can really resonate with that.
And those teachers you mentioned, for a child that actually was gay, were no kind of role model or example, or no mirror that you could look into and say, oh, I can respect that, I could grow into that. They were not. I mean, maybe that occasionally happens these days, I don't know, maybe. But if these were closeted and or paedophiliac, absolutely, for the gay child, that's even more frightening, even more terrifying. Can't go anywhere near that, which means I can't go anywhere near myself.
Yeah.
And I see in so many people who come to see me how much confusion that results in, how many unhappy relationships result.
Do you find people coming to you have that strong inner critic and that self-hatred that you mentioned there? there's something wrong with me, you know, because I certainly felt that, and I've heard this from other people saying they're just so beat themselves up.
Yes, you've got to work with kind of disidentifying from that, recognizing that in every thought I have about myself is another identity, really. None of them is actually me. And to be able to look at oneself with a bit of detachment and see, okay, there's that part of me, and there's that part of me, there's that part of me that I'm really repelled by, and there's that part of me that I don't even think about very much, and you know, so that we're not stuck in these identities.
And is there, because I think Pete Walker in his book Complex PTSD talks about this idea of being quite tough with the inner critic. How do you, if you've got, someone's got a really strong inner critic, is it just a step back, keep stepping back? What's the process you guide people through?
There's quite a few ways, really. I mean, you kind of, I ask, who are your image makers? Mm-hmm. Where did this image of you come from, and who formed it? Mm-hmm. Who told you this about yourself, that you've internalized and made your own? In a form of therapy called peso-boyden, which I use quite a bit, psychomotor, we call these voices, identify the voice, critical voice, the undermining voice, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. We see how they have a role. They protect us, but they also dampen down our spirit, our life force. And peso is a kind of work I increasingly love, because it's kind of rather it's a quick route to the unconscious. We make we spend some time, create a sort of drama, a bubble in which there's a called sphere of possibility, which we create an imaginary history that should have been. This may be in a group setting or individual work. And we create a new memory of what there should have been that would have met our needs. And that's powerful. Alternative memory is powerful because the right brain doesn't know that it's just a fiction. The left brain is thinking that, but the right brain if we work with it and make it palatable, actually gets to experience how it would have been to have had a different kind of father, a different kind of mother, that would have given us a different kind of life in which we would have not been sent to boarding school, certainly, and not been made to feel ashamed of our sexuality or terrified about it. Imagine what we might work towards is having somebody in a group playing a role of an ideal father, for example. He'd say, well, I don't know what you're going to do as you grow, but I know that I'm here to help you go out into the world and express your uniqueness in a way that's true for you. And I'll just keep your feet on the ground, and I'll keep you connected to your goodness and your power. Maybe an ideal mother who says, I'd always have my eyes on you and nourish you with my loving curiosity about who you are. See how that feels different from having the kinds of parents that say, it's time to go to boarding school.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. I hadn't heard of peso. I use a technique called matrix reimprinting, which is very similar. It's based on EFT, emotional freedom technique. So you tap on the different meridians, which is said to go into the amygdala part of the fight, flight, freeze. And I've been using it on myself for about 20 years. I found it really, really powerful. Then the matrix reimprinting is very similar, is we go into those boarding school memories. So I reflect on mine every day, the new pictures I've created. And I have one where my father's running towards me and he spins me around and he holds me up and then he hugs me and says, I love you. He never said that to me. He never, he was an ex-border military man. So that was never an experience I had, but now I reflect on that and I just feel love in my heart, even as I think of that image.
Mm.
And for me, that's my relationship with my own masculine. Because I have that real warmth rather than what I had before. Was my last words to my father. I've said this on the podcast many times before. He was just about to die. He had cancer. And I said to him, I felt like you've hated me my whole life. And he burst into tears, only the second time I ever saw him cry. And he said, my whole life's been a lie, Piers. And it's, that was the relationship we had. And then to create, like through this peso, this matrix reimprinting, to create a new picture of one of, oh yeah, that he loves me and he supports me.
I always tend to think of my father, who died 40 years ago, as transformed up there or wherever he is, he's a different person, he's kind of got some, maybe at the moment of death, there's a kind of flood of wisdom, rather beautiful, that comes on a person.
I think so. I went to see who did I go and see? I went to see a medium years ago and I was very doubtful. I just wanted to ask experience. And he gave me the recording and he said, while we were talking, he said, your father keeps coming in. So I was like, I don't want to speak to him. No. But didn't think much of it. But then I took the recording home. And whenever, I can't remember which way around it was, but I think it was whenever I was speaking or the medium was speaking, it was just static. And then as soon as I started to speak, it was clear again. And I'm like, oh my God. At the beginning, I was annoyed. I thought, oh, the tape's not worked. But as I played it through, it's like, that's so weird.
It's a bit mind-blowing, isn't it?
It is. And so I wanted to hear what he had to say, but I couldn't because it was just so so it was like you, I'm sure there's some form of transformation. I think what my father was trying to say was ask for forgiveness for what he'd done and how he'd been.
And that thought was transformative for you.
Yeah.
And that changes how you live your life. And, that's why you're doing things like this.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So some of the other questions I have, I mean, is there anything further you would like to say? I mean, you said in your paper, all experienced their schools as profoundly homophobic environment. So, is there anything more you want to say about how boarding school impacts us sexually? If we were gay, lesbian, or bisexual, or if we weren't, but we just wanted to date? Because I've heard so many, I could relate as I read your paper that, oh yeah, I struggle sexually to this day and I'm still working on it. And I could relate into that. So is there anything you'd like to say about that?
I think sometimes we can see in a person's body how they've responded to these experiences. You can see some people's shape is sort of hunkering down, which is kind of like, I had to keep my passion down, sort of really like that. And then it's good to work with a person's energy, just get them up in the room and get them stretching and get them punching something a little bit, or just having a different sense of themselves. and then recognizing when when fear comes in, because those people are afraid to be themselves, to be big, to be true, and yeah, I see that quite a lot, really. People are guarded, and that will come into every aspect of their life, including their sexuality. So working with what's happening in the body, I think, is very important. Learning what the patterns are that they need to watch for and inhibit and challenge.
Thank you. You mentioned a bit of somatic work. Is that something you still do, or you recommend? That like movement. What am I feeling?
Yes, I'm still working on kind of on what works, really. I did some training with Stanley Kellerman, who was founded formative psychology or somatic emotional approaches, and Peter Levine, somatic experiencing, and Alexander Technique. I trained in for many years, which is similar. It's kind of like seeing what the patterns are in Alexander Technique. You're either concentrating or collapsed, or I think they would call mind wandering, so dissociated or end gaining, focusing on something over there rather than being present. So you watch for each of these forms, each of these movement patterns, and there are lots of ways of working with them, really. Or some people just need their feelings to be expressed and witnessed. So I 1 week a year I go to I sort of volunteer with an organisation called Heal for Life, which does residential retreats for people who have been traumatized or abused in some way in childhood. And then there's a lot of expression through painting, through burning, through smashing things, through beating cushions or trees with bats, or there's that kind of people being able to experience power in that kind of way. That's very restorative for people. So we still do that sometimes.
Beautiful. Interesting. Yeah, I loved creativity. That was one of my big healings in my 20s. I have this picture here, but I did a lot of abstract paintings.
Yeah.
And just with my hands, and I found that. And Robert Moore, in his book The Lover Archetype, The Lover Within, says it's like we can access those pre-verbal memories. So I used to carry so much anger, and to paint, it's like, with my hands, it was like, yeah, rather than dumping that onto someone or going into addictions, it was channeling it into a positive way, or singing, or dancing.
Yeah. Music is fantastic.
Yeah. I have my guitar here, so yeah, I love that. So from the other questions I sent through, is there anything particular, because we've got about 5 to 10 minutes left?
What are your questions?
What was that?
I'm not sure if I remember your questions. I'm just looking for them now.
Right. Well, the other areas I was talking about, I mean, one of the questions was, why is it difficult for gay men and women to come to terms with their boarding school experience? I mean, you've obviously talked about that a bit. Anything you would like to add in? Anything you would recommend them to do? Do you still do your workshops?
We're doing workshops for gay and straight men together, not
Mm.
specifically for gay men.
Mm.
Your questions. I think I just want to say to people, don't give up.
Mm.
It's an awful lot of healing that can be done. We know more and more about how we work as people. The understanding of the vagus nerve has been a big revolution, I think. It makes sense of all that EFT stuff you were doing, the tapping, it's following the ventral vagal nerve, I think. And yeah, whatever we can do to bring boarding school, maybe keep them open for over 16s, but basically a really iniquitous institution. So I call them repressive, austere, and joyless institutions.
Repressive, austere,
joyless institutions from which everything tactile, sensual, or voluptuous was deliberately excluded.
and I can so resonate with that. That's heartbreaking on one level. Yeah. Well, thank you, Marcus. How do people find out more about you if they want to go on one of your workshops or reach out for therapy?
I've got 2 websites.
Okay.
One is called nottinghilltherapy.co.uk.
Yeah.
Although I'm no longer actually in Notting Hill, but I've still got the name nottinghilltherapy.co.uk.
Okay.
There's another website called boardingrecovery.com.
Recovery.
So me and a few colleagues who've specialized in this field of working with boarders are listed on there. And that's an expanding list, actually. And my other website is called www.bodyinmind.london.
Bodyinmind.london. Okay. So I've got nottinghilltherapy.co.uk, boardingrecovery.com, and bodyinmind.london.
That's right, Piers. Thank you.